Good evening. Once again, another Tuesday evening. Tuesday's Thoughts, as it's called at the moment. I guess I might look at another name at some point. But just want to say good evening to everyone this evening if you're watching live and if you're watching later on in the week or even weeks or months later. Welcome and thank you for taking the time out. We're looking at 20-25 minutes, just looking at a particular issue. We're looking at moral injury. So I'm just waiting for my sound engineer just to give me the thumbs up on Facebook. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And on Facebook as well. Then I'm ready to go. Just to say, continual huge thank you for folks who watch weekly and those who watch weekly but not live. They catch up. Really good to see us all this evening. So thank you very much indeed, Saf. And for those of you watching silently, you may have your pads out. Great. So my name is Delroy Hall. I'm the CEO and founder of Delroy's Consultancy with over 30 years experience in leadership at local, regional, national and international level, but also over 30 years experience as a psychotherapist and trainer. So that's what part of this is about. For those of you who may be new, welcome. And certainly if you're new watching, your friend has forwarded this on to you. Just great. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to watch. It started off in first lockdown and 4 years on nearly is still going. So I'm really grateful for people taking the time. Even the scrollers who might be just scrolling for a few seconds and they're off onto something else. But I'll be changing that at some point in the not too distant future. So all the sessions I've done so far, it's no substitute for going to make an appointment to see a doctor, GP, same thing, psychologist, therapist, counsellor, where you need to get that sustained help. Please get it. This is just hints and tips, just kind of get us through. So good evening, Sonia. Good to see you this evening, and anyone else who's joining in. Right, so we're looking at moral injury. Now, the first time I heard about moral injury, good evening, Jenny, was a few years ago. I was an external examiner for a university where they were doing master's degrees on human catastrophes. Reading some of the assignments, I was moved by some of the content. I think the word is visceral. There was an emotional at a gut level of humanitarian workers working, and then lots of difficulties they struggled with. So this whole thing about moral injury, a few years ago now, and then I started to hear people's experiences at work, and I realized that people are experiencing the same thing. So tonight I'm just going to be laying the foundation. You may have seen the article, laying the foundation for what moral injury is, and over the next few weeks I'll be looking at the impact of moral injury on our humanity. It's really important. So I'll just begin. The individuals who are exposed to traumatic events that violate their moral values, so that's the thing, may experience severe distress and function is impaired. That's called moral injuries. Moral injury is not a mental illness. It's not classified as that at the moment, but it refers to psychological, sociological and spiritual impact on the person who's experienced either form of betrayal or witnessing something they shouldn't have done, or participated in something that they should not have done. And certainly where your beliefs and values are violated in high risk, especially in high risk situation. So one of the areas, of course, which started off is this whole thing around the returnees from the Vietnam War. But one of the areas, the other area that there's lots of work done in terms of moral injury is the medical profession. The pandemic, what we've just had. So one of the research I read was that when they interviewed some health workers, one of the interviewers said, quote, "I felt like our lives were more disposable than our PPE equipment." And other comments were, "I felt as though we were being offered up to the slaughter for having to stay in a COVID-filled room with questionable PEE." So people were put in difficult situations, and the baseline of their values, there was a violation, and that caused what they call moral injury. A detailed study in the health profession post-pandemic said that what happened during the time of the pandemic, doctors and nurses worked really, really well together. They had to. but there was a severe mistrust on the leadership of many medical organizations. Deep frustration and anger, doctors and nurses. And the anger was they had taken an oath to look after people as best they could, but their situations meant that they couldn't do it because there's a whole range of things that was happening, not alone before the vaccination, but how they were wanting to take people, but there were no beds and so forth, had to send people back home. One article that I read that somebody was bleeding from the colon and there was no beds available. This was in America, no beds available. So the nurse had to send the patient back home, and the real kind of conflict in terms of having to send the patient back home, and the moral value that they had was violated because of that particular incident. So you would have perhaps read from the article, but those who've not read the article, all this started from Jonathan Shea, a Jewish, I believe it was a Jewish psychiatrist, and observed something from the soldiers that returned from Vietnam. Now, I didn't know this till I looked it up. The Vietnam War started in 1955 and ended 20 years later. So you've got men who were returning, mainly men, returning back home in a really sad state. Not that they were on the battlefield for 20 years, but experienced lots of things. But the issue wasn't, well, war was one thing, and he noticed that people could survive the horror and the terror, but what really troubled people was the moral injury. And that came about as he looked at them, and it wasn't the war was one thing, but you had soldiers who really struggled with shortage of food, shortage of water. When their comrades were injured, the level of care wasn't there to help them. You and I have watched enough films whereby, now, these are films, of course, where somebody, the Navy SEALs have gone in, or somebody's gone in to do some work, and there should be a pickup. They've arrived at the pickup only to hear they're not going to come to get you. Now, that happened. Perhaps didn't happen often, but it happened enough to affect individuals. And individuals gone to war, maybe they understood war, but then they realized that they'd killed civilians, killed children. And this is what Jonathan Shea said. People came back suffering with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. People also came back with moral injury, and he said there was no recovery from moral injury. And it was a moral injury that led more veterans to suicide than PTSD. So there's this whole thing about when your values are violated, core values are violated, this whole thing about what is right, what is wrong, it's as though there's a tsunami in your internal world which is fractured, and never the twain shall meet. Interestingly enough, I'll say a bit more about it, that they're still, this is about kind of 20 years old, so they're still struggling to find effective therapy that can help people to kind of gain a level of normality. Because one of the issues, of course, is that when this happens and somebody's internal world is disrupted, the question really is, what does all this mean? You know, what is this all about? What is life anyway? And it really distorts people's way of thinking and so forth. So he said, none recovered from moral injury. Most led, quite a lot of veterans then ended up taking their lives. They couldn't come to terms with what had happened on the war on the battlefield, especially with civilians and children. There's been lots of films about the moral dilemmas that drones are facing and so forth. So more research is needed, but it really is about moral injury, but it really is about the violation of the self and values. And values are something that is really important to it. It has worth, it's usefulness of something. So values are the beliefs that people have, especially what is right or wrong, and what is most important in life. It controls their behavior. In fact, nothing that we do comes from a place where values are not involved. I remember talking to an academic years ago, and he said, Delroy, everything that we do comes from the values that we hold. It was interesting talking to a guy many years ago. He said to me that in terms of the home he was raised in, he said there weren't many values at all. For example, he told me, this is what his mother and father told him: if you ever steal anything, don't get caught. So that was the values. Now, for lots of us listening, that's not the type of environment that we came from. We were told things like respect your elders, don't steal, don't lie, all those type of things. So he said his parents told him, if you're going to steal, don't get caught. So this whole thing about values is really important. Now, there's loads of values, of course, but there's 5 main values which seem to be consistent throughout us as human beings: love, peace, truth, right conduct, and non-violence. So when these are violated, they're broken, it really does disrupt what takes place within us. And I'll share a couple of stories in a few minutes' time about the impact of moral injury. I'm going to be talking about moral injury in the workplace. And I think what I have come to believe, reading the assignments, then looking at this, and also when people start to tell me stories, I reflect on things quite a lot. And I'll just say this, I don't know whether the individuals might be watching, but a few weeks ago, I was reflecting on something and I had my knuckles wrapped. That's all I will say. But nobody will stop me from reflecting on life and life experience. That's how we learn, that's how we grow. And one of the things, of course, moral injury is a very common experience. It started off from when Jonathan Shea used Iliad and the Odyssey, to poems written by Homer in the Greek mythology about the War of Trojan. And a particular scene happened, and I think somebody called Proclus died, and his friend wasn't able to protect him, and that led to a kind of torturous guilt that the person experienced. And this whole thing around moral injury, how do we deal with this thing where we've been violated? So I'll be talking about moral injury in the workplace in a week or two's time. But certainly listening to people experiencing this has led me to kind of question quite a few things. So there's an excellent article by Ludmila Praslova, and this is what she writes in the beginning of her article, which I found really fascinating. She said, now one of the things I wanted just to say, and it's something I stumbled across quite a few months ago when I was looking at this whole thing about moral injury. I used to think that burnout was caused by either long hours, doing silly things at work and not looking after yourself and all the rest of it. And it is, but also what I've discovered as I looked at moral injury and I started to ask questions, moral injury can lead to burnout. And here's the rub. Burnout can be retrieved, that we can recover, but at the moment, we don't seem to recover from moral injury very well. Guilt, anger, depression, anxiety, and it somehow can't get shifted. So that's where we are at the moment. And listening to people who are really struggling with issues at work, it begins to affect their well-being in a whole range of ways, which I will share over the next few weeks. So this is what she said about signs and so forth of moral injury. And I'll just read this bit. Employees across the range of occupations are resigning in unprecedented numbers, often in distress. Attempts to address employees' satisfaction and dissatisfaction and burnout with bonuses, mindfulness, and extra time off do not seem to be working well. One person said that if she ever hears another employer talking to people experiencing moral injury, mindfulness, yoga, all that type of stuff, she says she'll throw up. It doesn't cut it. Something else is needed, and I'll say more about that in a moment. So attempts to address employees' satisfaction and burnout with bonuses, mindfulness, and extra time do not seem to be working well enough. Employees continue to quit, sometimes angrily and dramatically, airing a range of grievances on social media. So some of us will know, we'll talk about the great resignation, which was happening before COVID-19. The great resignation was where people were beginning to just get fed up with their workplaces and were resigning. They called it the Great Resignation, which also led to the Great Disillusionment. So interestingly, the millennials, they will work at a company, but the minute that they see that the values of the work company does not manage their own, they're off. Where my age group, we might stay with it and become sick in the process. Millennials will say, no, we're off. So what's needed is not so much now, and I've been around long enough to know organizations, people will complain, and instead of listening to them, the first port of call, they'll be fobbing them off straight away to counseling or well-being or EAP, employee assistance program. They may be fine, but one of the issues is this. It's an issue that many counselors have, is simply this. You do really good work with an individual, excellent work in the therapy room, and then you say goodbye and they go back to a toxic, dysfunctional family or toxic, dysfunctional workplace. So you're back to square one. What's really needed is a systematic and structural change in an organization. I shan't say where this person works, but the person works in an organization, multi-million-pound industry. He has a very important role, and about 2 years ago, struggling a lot with his health, a lot of work, a lot of pressure. And as I said, very influential in his workplace, and he had 12 direct reports. And as I was talking to him, and I'm listening over a period of time, getting a sense of the organization, earning mega millions. And I said to him, and I don't know what led me to ask the question. I said, of those reports that you have, there's 12, how many of them are off on long-term sick? 4 people, 25% of his workforce was off with long-term stress. And I thought, what? I said, what's HR doing about it? What's the welfare? Nothing, because it's all driven by money. People's well-being are not kind of taken as important. They say it's important, but if you take nothing from this session today, words are cheap. You will know how an organization cares for you by what they do, not what they say. And one of the things when I'm hearing people talk, and I'll share with you a couple of examples. These are stories that I've taken from this particular article by the psychologist. A guy called Henry became an accountant and wanted to work for a particular charity. That's what he just wanted to do. He was a chartered accountant, got an interview, was successful, and really looking forward to the job. But shortly he realized financially things weren't stacking up, and he started to raise questions about financial discrepancies. He was told to turn a blind eye. This clashed with the values, the thought and ideas he had of the organization. It clashed with the values. It then happened that he stopped sleeping at night, started to get angry with his family, angry with his work colleagues, because he was in this environment where he was told to turn a blind eye. And that can happen in some organizations. You go in with all honesty and with dignity, integrity, but how the organization functions, they tell you to turn a blind eye to some of the discrepancies and the ways in which they're working, which are not correct. The other person I want to share is somebody called Kim. That's the name of the story. So these are not people I know. This is just the story. So Kim was really looking. She wanted to be HR in this marketing organization, and really enjoyed what she was doing. But then she noticed a few things. There was a high turnover of staff. And she noticed with the exit interviews, there was themes that was coming up. People felt they were either bullied or pushed out of their job. When she started doing some investigation, she made some comment about it, and people told her to keep quiet about it and just do her job. As she did some more investigation, what she discovered, there was a policy that said that we will interview people at the age of 20, but by the time people get to the age of 35 or a bit older, we need to start getting rid of them because we want a young organization. So people in their exit interview were stating the reason why they were leaving was either they were intimidated, pushed out, or bullied. And she noticed this. She started to raise it as a concern, and she was basically told to do her job. Now, here is the rub. She was taught to respect her elders. So here's this young woman being told by older people, keep your head down, don't say anything, just get on with your job. And she felt that she couldn't talk to her family. And if the family asked, how's the job going? What could you say? What could you not say? So this song around moral injury is something, as I said in the introduction, it's more common than we realize. And maybe you're working in a particular place. I've known people who, they didn't know it was moral injury, but they were witnessing things in their workplace. They didn't even make noise about it, but they raised it as concerns. And over a period of time, it was dismissed, it was ignored. They themselves, if they keep raising it, if they're not in kind of a powerful position, but even then that's precarious. If they're not in a powerful position, they can be targeted. So what happens is you spot something which is wrong, you raise it, it's against policy, you might even quote the policy, but you're told to be quiet. And then what happens, you're articulating something, but then you become the victim. And then, excuse me, you are then targeted and really drummed out of the organization. So moral injury is where your values have been violated. It came out from the world of military, of returnees coming back to Civvy Street, not settling in very well. The room I'm in, I think, is a bit dry, so the air's quite warm, so it's got my throat. So they've returned. PTSD, yes, and there is an overlap between PTSD. The PTSD quite often is something horrific that you've seen. That's one. But moral injury is more to do with the violation of your value base that has been disrupted because you've seen something that is clearly wrong. And what some people do to survive a workplace, they turn the blind eye. But there's something about us as human beings. If we know that something is wrong, we don't settle comfortably knowing it is so. Some people manage to sit on their emotions and just get on with their work, but there's long-term consequences to that. Some people, of course, if they begin to talk about it, they then have difficulties. Workplace can get quite difficult, and the next thing they're the target, and the next thing, what workplaces can do, and those of you that are listening either live or later on, so what some workplaces can do, they can conspire to get rid of you. Remember some time ago I spoke about betrayal, and sometimes you can be betrayed in your workplace, not because you've done anything wrong, but because you're doing things right, but it is highlighting the inadequacies and incompetence of the workforce who should be doing more, but they're not. So this whole thing around moral injury is something to be to take note. So signs of moral injury: transgressions by others. So managers, leaders, supervisors, you see them behaving in ways to members of staff which you know is not right. Also, you can have a moral injury, as Henry and Kim, that you know that something is wrong, you highlight it, but you're told to ignore it, and you know that this is wrong. There's individuals I've known, I personally have known that it's Delroy. I really wanted to work for this organization. I was so glad I went to the interview, and I did great at the interview, and really glad I was joining it. And then within a few weeks, I started to notice a few things that were happening, and it didn't sit comfortable with me. I made some noise about it. I was told to keep quiet, and I thought, you know what, this is not going to change, so I'm out of here. So I've known people that have done that. They've not stayed too long at all. Even within their probationary period, they go because they can see how the organization is. the organization is not up for change. So before they stay and become unwell, they're off. So there's transgression by others. And you yourself can be put in a real compromise. You're asked to do things that you know is wrong, but to remain in the work or to remain in the team and to be one of the individuals, you do what you shouldn't do. Or the other one, of course, is betrayal. That feeling that managers, leaders, and colleagues and policymakers have betrayed the policies and procedures that are in place. So these things are partly some of the things that can lead to moral injury. I'm going to leave it at that. Over the next few weeks, you can see already that moral injury can have major implications on our well-being, psychologically, emotionally, just on two parts alone, but it has wider implications on our entire humanity, which I'm going to share over the next few weeks. Now, of course, you may decide if you're in a place of work, look, I can't leave it. Something I wrestle with people. And I never say to people, you must leave. And sometimes people have to stay for a whole range of reasons. But if you get to the place, this is my bottom line, if you get to the place where you're doing all you can to maneuver, to navigate, remember the word navigate is to plot, to chart, to be intentional. You chart a plan or a pathway in a particular organization. The moment you do all that and you're becoming unwell, you have only one option, and that is to leave. No workplace is worth you becoming sick for. So that's moral injury part one. We'll be looking at that over the next few weeks. I don't know if anybody's got a comment or a response, or maybe even somebody might be watching. Either one, you might realize that this is what you're experiencing in your workplace. Two, you may know somebody. Some of the things that I've described, you might be wondering whether or not that's what they're experiencing, having a difficult time. And that's right. Number one, number two, and maybe three is just being aware of work environments and also what you can put up with, what you should put up with, and maybe what you shouldn't put up with in terms of your health and so forth. Anyway, that's me done. So enjoy your Tuesday evening. And enjoy the rest of the week, and all being well, back here on Tuesday. Continue this. It's a very new, it's only 20 years old, this whole thing about moral injury. And of course, I think lots of organizations, they have lots of employees that are wrestling with this, but the way that a lot of organizations do it, they have some form of counseling, EAPs, employee assistance programs. I was communicating with somebody on LinkedIn recently, a lawyer, who was a mother who became mentally unwell and then ended up taking her own life, if I remember the story correctly. Deeply saddening. And the thing is that these things shouldn't happen. Unfortunately, they do keep happening. And I wrote in my comment that what happens in some organizations, there may be a funny side to this, but there's a very serious side to this. Some organizations are so entrenched in how they work. Somebody senior maybe take their own lives, and all they do around the boardroom, they shuffle the chairs around to give the impression that everybody's still present, and it's business as usual. Nothing changes. Nobody's asking questions. They might say something when the person has passed. Oh, it's very, very sad. We must do something about it. That's once what you hear, but nothing is ever done, or nothing is seldom done, and the business continues the way that it always has done. So I'll say no more than that. I think you know where I'm going with this. So wish you well, enjoy your Tuesday evening and the rest of the week. And I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. If you found this helpful, some insights, please feel to share with your friend. As I disappear, I'll just put this on there. Please feel to share with your friends. Oh, hang on, somebody here. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Jenny. Yeah. So that's it. Take care of yourself. It's more of an informative, just to be aware of what's taking place. So enjoy the rest of the evening and speak to you soon. Take care. All the best. But obviously you can email me or direct message me. I'm always open for that. Take care. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.